Hi, welcome to Valley News Digest. I'm John Gregg, the news editor at the Valley News, and this is a regular show we're doing with our friends here at CATV, talking with editors, reporters, and photographers about stories we're covering around the Upper Valley. For those of you who are new to the region, we're the daily paper based in West Lebanon. We've been here since 1952. We cover most of Windsor and Orange counties in Vermont and most of Sullivan and Grafton counties in New Hampshire and statewide issues in both states. And we also have our website, vnews.com, one of the most heavily visited websites in the Upper Valley. And joining us first is our new editor, Maggie Cassidy, a White River Junction resident who has been with our paper since 2012. She started out covering Hartford and breaking news. And she succeeds Marty Frank, who has been in our paper for more than 30 years, much of it as the editorial page editor. And Marty's been our editor for the past 5 years and helped us navigate through some changes there. And we've done some major stories with him. Maggie grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts, and her father, Gene Cassidy, was actually my news editor there when I worked for the Metro West Daily News almost 20 years ago. And it's all in the family. Maggie's husband, Chico Eastridge, is the studio manager here at CATV. So Maggie, welcome and congratulations. And needless to say, you kind of grew up in a newsroom.
That's right. So yeah, my dad worked at the paper. It was the Middlesex News for some time, and it was the Metro West Daily News by the time I think you started working with him. Yeah. I don't know if you remember me crawling around the newsroom at all, or if I was older by that time. But we would spend time, my brother, my dad, even our dog, Coco, Chocolate Lab, who you might remember, in the newsroom. Dad would set us up at a workstation, and we would, type out some gibberish on the computer, and those were the days of paste up. So he would print it out, take an X-Acto knife, cut things out, and make a little fake page for us. So it has been a long time coming, working in the newspaper business. Right,
and I think you had at least an article or a letter to the editor published when you were 12, right? If not sooner?
Yeah. My dad found out, so he also was a columnist, and he found out pretty quickly that it was an easy way to fill some copy and to get a lot of positive reaction, to put some of my, 6-year-old, 7-year-old musings at the end of his columns from time to time. And so that turned into a regular Thanksgiving column for a few years when I was in elementary school. And then I think I had some very strong thoughts about the Spice Girls at one point that made it into a letter to the editor that they let me get away with printing in the newspaper. So yeah, I was very privileged to be able to have that, firsthand experience of seeing what it's like to work in a newsroom, all of the characters, all of the dedication, the noise, the energy, and also, what it's like to write and even be published.
Yeah, and I think you've also said one of the things you learned was some of the guiding principles of journalism too, needless to say, from your dad.
Yeah, absolutely. He, I count him as my first editor. All of those Thanksgiving columns he edited, but also, sort of more substantive things as I went along. Ultimately working part-time at that paper when I was in high school, but also in college, I would turn to him. And in fact, I think that was one of the first times that you and I reconnected, was when I had a question that he felt would be better suited for you to answer when I was working at a paper in Hawaii. So I continue to turn to him for guidance and have been very lucky to have that.
Yeah, great. Now, you started as a reporter here, as we said, but you quickly also became our web editor. I think it's fair to say, especially before Maggie's arrival, it was a very minimalist website because we were concerned about losing readers from the web, from print to the web. But Maggie's done a lot to transform it over the years. We just won the website just won the Vermont Press Association Outstanding Website. So that's obviously there have been some improvements. What have you been focused on with the website?
I think the focus with the website has been figuring out how the website and the newspaper can work together to deliver news and everything else we deliver to readers. So, hard news, feature sports, and also, things, frankly, that fall outside of our department, including things like classifieds and things like that. And I think that that's something that we're still working on to make it feel like one product, one sort of machine that's working every day. We've worked on expanding what we do, things that physically can't be done in a print edition. That includes things like videos, both short snippets from scenes that get at the immediacy of a breaking news situation, or the sort of longer, more involved narrative videos that are driven by our photographers. So obviously that's something that at this point at least we can't do, in something that's delivered, to your doorstep every day, but it's something that our website can do. And then the other most significant piece is breaking news in general, not just with videos. So if something is happening in real time, we've gotten really good, I think, at letting readers know what's happening, in their communities, whether it's something like a fire or whether it's something, like a lawsuit involving a major institution. We've gotten good at bringing that to people in real time.
Yeah, I think just the other day, for instance, we had a story where there were 3 young men who were charged with driving around Claremont, firing a gun off, striking at least 2 homes. So we were up immediately on the web with the news of their arrest, and then in print the next day, I think we had a story which also, of course, was on the web with some more context and what happened in court, and in fact, and also one of the homeowners whose house was struck and what she had to say about that, because needless to say, that can be kind of a terrifying situation. I think she had kids too. So there seems that we can get as you said, the immediacy of the news, and also give readers in print some more as well. So we have a print circulation, I think, of about 13 or 14,000. What happens, how much, if we have a big story on the web, how many readers might that sort of hit?
So it really runs the range. So on a daily basis, not really talking about some of these bigger stories, but just sort of your more average news story of the day. 3,000, hits on the website side of that story. So that's the main site at vnews.com. That doesn't count the people who read that digitally in our e-edition, which is also part of our website, but that's the PDF that looks like the print edition. So we're talking about 3,000 on any given average day on just that first part, not on the e-edition. Bigger stories start to get up into the higher 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And our biggest story of last year was in the 80 in the 80,000 range, and we had quite a few in the I think maybe one in the 40s, several in the 30s, and quite a few in the 20s. So those are the higher traffic stories. Overall, we're averaging about 1.4, 1.5 million views on the website each month, and that is made up of about 250,000 individual people. So either that 250,000 would include people who might not live in the Upper Valley come in to read a story that we've done. The bulk of it is actually Upper Valley readers.
Yeah. Yeah. And also with us covering Dartmouth, if there have been some big Dartmouth stories, that has a lot of national interest, or could be, with readers coming in. And then there have been some crime stories and court stories with
Right.
national interest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are your goals? You've been in the job a couple of weeks now. What are your goals and visions in leading the Valley News as we continue serving readers both through print and the web?
So I think I touched on it a little bit before, but the web is still very new to us, and there are times where it feels a little bit siloed in terms of our process. And so I think by continuing to bring the web and print together as one, readers are going to feel that in terms of how we're working on those two products, making them more cohesive. That is going to be a more cohesive experience for readers. That includes, putting more stories online throughout the day. That includes, working on our other offerings and seeing what makes sense for us to do, what kinds of digital-only offerings that we're going to include. Our publisher announced, last year that we are going to be printing at a different size. The actual print edition will be narrower, like the same size as the Boston Globe, and quite a few. We are the outlier in terms of our size right now, and so adjusting to that size is also going to be one of the main priorities of this year. Just figuring out how to work in a different layout and how to tell news in a different way.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're still continuing to do some sort of big, long, thoughtful journalism. We've just run a series by Matt Hongel-Tetling about a woman, Rebecca Dunbar, who's been through the social services system, been in several abusive relationships, and how that's carried over in her life. But obviously we're balancing that, still doing that, and a lot of breaking news. You mentioned that we are going to be moving to a new press. The paper itself, of course, is staying in West Lebanon,
yes.
And the reporters in the newsroom and the business side of things. But like all papers, we are facing some challenges. But we're having this big change. The paper is going to shrink in size a little bit, but also what might that mean, say, for readers in terms of getting the Red Sox score or getting their paper delivered?
So what it means is that we in the coming weeks will be talking about exactly what is going to work with our deadline, because part of printing on the narrower size at the new press is that in order to get papers from that press, which is in Concord, back to where we're all still going to be in West Lebanon, is an earlier deadline because of the travel time. Part of that discussion will be how can we, again, going back to the web, continue to deliver readers, what they need and want to know. It might just look a little different in the print edition. So it might be leaning more heavily on the website for some of those things that have traditionally been in the print edition, that because of earlier deadlines, we're going to have to be taking a look at. If a Sox game goes late into the night, then that's going to be the kind of thing that will be on our website, but might not make it in the print edition any longer.
Or until the next day, or we'll certainly refer back to what happened if
Right.
It's a game in Oakland that goes until 1 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a game in Oakland that goes until 1 in the morning, it was already very tough for us.
Right.
But now it's just not going to be able to make it. So
Sure.
how can we look at that challenge and find a way to use the other tools that we have to still be delivering that news?
Yeah, I know you also want to hear from some readers, and are going to be reaching out to the community. You're very much in the heart of White River, and out and about. What are some of the things that you're thinking about on those lines?
Yeah, so that's another major goal of the year, is to increase our public outreach and I would like to be very deliberate in the way that we are reaching out to readers. So, some of those ideas are still in the works. One of them that I'm very interested in is, sort of a road show, so to speak. So getting out into communities, maybe libraries, to have conversations with readers about, how they use the paper, how they use the website, what they like about the paper, if there are other things that they would like to see on top of what we do or see things differently. And there are a few other ideas, that'll be, coming down the pipeline as well. But in general, being very intentional in the way that we are trying to, talk to readers and have, we've always been in West Lebanon. People know who we are, I think, and know how to get in touch with us if they are so motivated to. But what I'm trying to do is to increase on that and to reach out to readers even before they are reaching out to us.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting, I've worked for some papers with bigger circulation in my career, but what's really always been particularly rewarding and interesting is we have a very engaged readership, and it's great that, we try to serve them and they let us know, and that's an important thing, and obviously that's going to continue.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Maggie.
Thank you.
And next up, since we've been talking with a lifelong newspaper fan, we're going to talk to a reporter with some stories about young journalists as well. Joining us now is Sarah Earle, a feature writer for our close-up section who covers education and other issues. Sarah dug into a new and somewhat troubling trend when it comes to student newspapers. Hi, Sarah, welcome. Thanks for being here. How healthy are student newspapers?
Hi, John. Based on my research in this area, I would say they're not especially plentiful or influential in this day and age. I checked in with, I think, 8 or 10 schools in the Upper Valley area, and of those I found 3 that have, I guess, what you would call regular, real student newspapers with a staff that meets on a regular schedule and at least somewhat regular production schedule, along with one that's starting up again after a hiatus of a few years. With one notable exception, these are, I guess you could say, fairly humble operations.
Yeah, why are they not as prevalent as they used to be, and are there some important skills that are being lost?
I think the same forces that are affecting community newspapers seem to be affecting school newspapers, and they may even be amplified a bit in the school setting. This is, of course, the youngest demographic, a demographic that tends to get their news and their information online and through social media. It also, I think, becomes kind of a cyclical problem in that students maybe young people don't maybe see the value of traditional newspapers and traditional journalism, thus they aren't engaging with them, thus they're sort of diminishing, and then they don't have these sources of information to turn to. I guess another factor worth noting is that students live really busy lives these days and have a lot of things on their plates. There may be many students who would enjoy and would like to be on a student newspaper, but who just can't fit it into their schedules. I think what's in danger of being lost when you don't have this independent voice run by students is just media literacy, a sense of the functions and the value of journalism in a democracy. Actually, before I came here, I taught Intro to Journalism online for a few years, and I was sometimes a little bit dismayed by the, I guess, lack of engagement, lack of interest that young people seem to have with the news and with journalism, and sometimes their lack of understanding of its role in our country. Of course, there are other ways for young people to both gain media literacy skills and stay informed about what's going on in their schools. Some schools have a pretty vibrant student-run assembly program. Schools participate in things like newspapers in the schools. but I do think that a school newspaper really gives you that hands-on, that relevant experience of working on a newspaper. And not to mention, as you were talking to Maggie, it got me thinking about, just the value of that early exposure to a newspaper for students who may, our next generation of journalists.
Yeah, and you talked to some Upper Valley educators who are very cognizant of this and kind of concerned about it, right? And
yes, a few of the advisors, or all of the advisors had backgrounds in journalism, and were really working hard to impart those skills and those ideals on their students. But one of them mentioned that in sort of a shrugging sort of way, that they're not able to do the kind of hard-hitting journalism that they maybe once did. I didn't do an exhaustive story on newspapers through the years, but
yeah. Well, you mentioned also a program, newspapers in the schools. So some viewers might not know that isn't an actual newspaper. So that's newspapers coming in that they can read.
Newspapers coming in from, I'm not terribly familiar with it, but it's newspapers coming in from, I think maybe does the Valley News?
I think the Valley News definitely gets some papers into schools, sure, and some others. Now, are some of these student newspapers or programs moving online? What did you find, say, in Woodstock and Lebanon, for instance?
So yes, the three schools that have newspapers all have an online and print edition. Two of those three are printing pretty sporadically now, and at least one is considering just dropping its print edition. I should also mention that some schools that don't have a school newspaper per se do have a journalism class, and sometimes those classes will produce some kind of newspaper, and some of those are online only. In Woodstock and Lebanon, I got to speak with some very earnest, very intelligent young people who were running their student newspapers, and seemed to have a really good sense of what their role was in producing a newspaper for the school. But in all reality, they were both a pretty bare bones operation, pretty small staff, and met pretty sporadically, and just weren't, I guess, as I said, the advisor mentioned, just weren't able to produce those kinds of independent, authoritative, balanced stories that can really provide something, I think, of value to the school community.
Yeah. They do, obviously, as you said, can play a very important role. I think a Burlington area high school broke some news and got some attention earlier this year, or in 2018.
Yeah, a lot of people may have heard about this just a few months ago. The Burlington High School Register broke the news that a guidance counselor had been charged with several counts of unprofessional conduct. And actually the newspaper staff had to fight an attempt at censorship, which goes against a piece of 2017 legislation that a lot of people may be familiar with, called the New Voices Law, which explicitly prohibits school administrators from suppressing any kind of content just based on the fact that it might be controversial or critical. So I think that really does illustrate the power that a school newspaper can have and what it can do at its best.
Yeah, and you have also found at least one student newspaper here in the Upper Valley that does seem to be thriving, and that's the Hanover High, the Broadside at Hanover High School. What you talked to folks there? What did you find out?
Yes, so actually the Hanover High Broadside kind of forced us to, the story was already growing pretty long, but it kind of forced us to split it into two parts. Because here's this newspaper that's just really defying the trend that I was seeing elsewhere. They have a 80-plus year history, and they're just very active. They have a staff of at least a dozen students. They're really doing the things that newspapers do. They're attending the school board meeting and the council meetings and the sports events, and they're interviewing teachers and administrators and students to get that, that balanced story. They're pursuing tips, and they're very enthusiastic about what they're doing and seem to have a good sense of what their role is. They have they're posting online content regularly. They have a print edition that I think comes out 4 times a year. So they're really thriving at a time when school newspapers aren't thriving. They seem to attribute this to a very receptive atmosphere in both the school and the Hanover community. They said that the community is one that really supports that ideal, I guess, and that wants to know what's going on in the schools. I think the students themselves deserve a lot of credit for the success of the newspaper. They're out there distributing it in the community. They're very active on social media, kind of trying to amplify the voice of the newspaper. And they're even trying to sell ads again, which I guess they did some in their past. They're trying to get that going again. So I think they also deserve a lot of the credit. And I think just as the demise of some student newspapers is kind of a cyclical thing, I think the success of the Hanover High Broadside is a cyclical phenomenon in that they offer this really great newspaper with issues and an independent voice. And as the editor-in-chief told me, they want people to know the real story, what's really going on, not just the official story, not just the rumors, but the whole story. And because they provide that, people are reading it. Because people are reading it, they continue to have influence and so on. So I think it's also a cyclical phenomenon with them as well.
Yeah, we've had the staff of the Broadside has visited the Valley News twice in the last 2 years, and we certainly would welcome other student newspapers who want to come and see our newsroom and sort of what we're up to. And I'll say that the Broadside actually scooped me on something once last year. Two graduates, alumni from Hanover High, were running against each other in the New York primary for Attorney General, and they got it in on their website about a couple days before we got it in our paper. So they're doing well.
That's great.
And Sarah, thank you for filling us in, and thanks to all of you for watching Valley News Digest, and Happy New Year to everyone.